Hello friends and welcome to another itemization video. This time we're going to talk about the fluffy hat. It's a very cute icon, fits the holiday spirits right now and the weather. I guess it depends where you are. Itemization was put on hold a little bit because with the new patch, lots of changes, lots of new items, lots of changes to the item builds and why you would build certain things. It's tough. I gotta figure it out. So we're still working on it, but I felt that Fluffy Hat is fairly straightforward because it's a pretty cheap item. I think the cheapest item introduced in the new patch, and overall one of the cheapest items in the game still. And what it does is pretty straightforward. So I think we can go ahead and cover it, and we may have to save some of the other items for the future. But for now, let's talk about the Fluffy Hat. So if we break down the item here, very straightforward. It is 250 gold for 125 HP. Now, even though it builds into 3 items, many supports can think about Fluffy Hat as a dead end item. Why? Well, let's start with Falcon Blade. I just don't see why a support, at least in its current state, could get changed. But in its current state, I don't really see why a support would buy a Falcon Blade. Yes, it provides some health. Yes, it provides some mana regen. That's great. But then it just has some raw damage. And most supports don't really need to build something for just raw damage. If you just wanted a mana regen, you build something else. If you just want health, something else. Maybe just a Fluffy Hat. Yeah, it kind of consolidates them all into one slot, but the fact that a third of its power is damage makes me think it's not really a support item. Then you got the Orb of Corrosion. Some supports will buy this, but I don't think if you are a range support, you're going to buy it. So I'm thinking of heroes like Bounty Hunter, maybe Spirit Breaker. They could build this item, but you also have to keep in mind that several cores are also building this item right now. A couple melee cores like Wraith Kings and well, I've seen Lifestealers build it, but Lifestealer doesn't seem very good. But I guess that's not the point of this video. These don't stack. Just like you didn't really want multiple Orb of Venoms on a team, you're not going to really want multiple Orb of Corrosions either. So if you see a core building it, you're not going to want it. And even if you could build it, unless you're a very specific melee support, kind of like Bounty Hunter we mentioned, you're not going to build this item. Then there's Holy Locket, which seems like it might actually be getting good. We still need to test it out a bit more. But even if it does end up becoming quite popular, only some supports are going to build it. Particularly those with heals like Dazzle and Oracle. So even if it does become good, not every support's going to get it. And for that reason, Fluffy Hat, you can think of it as a dead end item. You don't have to think about it in terms of like, I might build it into something else later. Kind of like a Sage's Mask or something. Now, the reason you would still get it, though, is because it is very cheap HP. So, if you were to get this in terms of stats, you would need 6 strength to get 120 HP, which is just a little bit less of the 125 you get from the Fluffy Hat. Of course, you have to keep in mind that HP is just HP. So, strength gave the HP component we just talked about, but also gave some health regen and damage if you were a strength hero. So, in that regard, it's a you want to be a little careful when making a direct comparison because they aren't quite the same. However, we're still going to compare it to the Bracer. So, in the past, Bracer gave magic resistance, and it was the tank up item for supports. I think it gave a little bit more strength, and it was a little cheaper as well. So, if you needed to tank up as a support, whether it was from magic damage or physical, the Bracer was just very slot efficient, very cost effective, and you would buy it, fill up one of your slots, maybe even 2 with a Bracer, and be a little tankier as a support. Now the Bracer has been nerfed in that regard a little bit. It's only 5 strength, which is 100 HP, but it does give some passive HP regen from the strength, but as well from the Bracer. Still, the Bracer has dropped off in popularity in that regard. So when people wanted to tank up, the Bracer just wasn't as appealing because it didn't have the magic resist, and the strength was worse, and it was like it was getting more expensive than what a support wanted to build. But now the Fluffy Hat is very cost-effective alternative. So for half the price, so in fact you could even build 2 Fluffy Hats if you wanted to for the price of a Bracer, you get 125 HP, which if you bought 2, that's 250, and that, for 500 gold, 250 HP is the same as a Vitality booster, which is 1100 gold. So in terms of price, it is very efficient. That's why, so I wasn't sure what to call it. it is slot efficient for that cost in the item. But then you have to remember that it is filling up one of your slots. And so, in the grand scheme of things, because it's a dead end item, it is to an extent inefficient. But that's kind of the point of small items. When you buy a casual windlace, you buy the Bassy, you buy a fluffy hat, I suppose. They're cost efficient, slot efficient while you build on something bigger, but eventually you are going to replace these items with something more slot efficient. And so that's why I kind of have it in parentheses, where it is both efficient and inefficient. Efficient for now, inefficient in the long term. But something I think with this patch change could make things like Fluffy Hat a little better, small items a little better, is that the Aghanim shards got brought into the game. And the Aghanim shard does not take up a slot. So the issue with small items before were that you would buy 6 items essentially. A couple could be consumables. But you would get to 6 items, and then it's time to think of a bigger item. And then you're going to have to sell one of these small items. And the time in between that, not forgetting that big items have like small components which you could use, it ended up being like you could only get like 1 small item, maybe 2, before you had to like already sell it. And if you only hold this item for like a couple minutes before it's time to sell it, well, that's not very efficient, because when you sell this item, you lose half the value. But with the Aghanim shards taking up no slots, you can now buy some small items, save up the gold for your Aghanim shard, buy that shard, and then save up the gold for your next big item, which will replace one of your small items. But the point is, there's a lot longer period of time where you are getting this slot efficient item for the price until you have to replace it because it's inefficient, if that makes sense. Not everyone is going to buy a shard, though. A couple heroes do look like they can get a shard pretty quickly. That is still, I think it'll still change a lot, so I don't want to tell you guys like this hero, so on. But going forward, if you think your support can build a shard very quickly, and it's a game where you've decided like, oh, I do want to build a shard this game, you might be able to buy more small items like the Fluffy Hat to fill up a slot. And it'll be a little more effective than it was in the past. Now, in terms of the why you would buy this item, it is for the HP. But let's think about some of the things it goes against. So against pure damage, it is, of course, just 125. That's how pure damage works. Against magic, if you have the 25, well, everyone has the 25 default magic resistance, but if you've bought anything else, it's going to be a little higher. But if you're at the default, then it's actually worth 166 effective HP. Now, for armor, it's going to vary, of course, because as we level up, it's a little easier to change your armor throughout the game than it is for magic resistance. So here's a table of some of the more common values for support near the early game, and then like many supports don't even pass 10 unless they buy some armor items. So we'll just leave it at that on the table. But what I did want to point out is that if you are at 1050 HP, the Ring of Protection becomes a little more effective at boosting your effective HP against physical damage. So if your only concern is physical damage and you're trying to decide, oh, I've got 1 more slot to fill up, should I buy a Fluffy Hat? Should I buy a Ring of Protection? At 1050 HP, if you're only worried about the physical, you can buy a Ring of Protection. It's a little cheaper and it'll give you more effective HP against physical. However, it's very rare to only be concerned about physical damage. There's usually a lot of magic in a game. There's usually a mix. So the Fluffy Hat has a little more value there because you are going to benefit whether it is magic or physical hitting you. But in a game where they happen to have like 5 physical carries, then yes, consider the fact that at 1050 or higher, the Ring of Protection is better. Now, if you're a very low HP support, then you might still buy the Fluffy Hat. So you're sitting at like 700 HP and you're trying to fill up that last slot, then you might decide to buy the Fluffy Hat because just the raw HP is more effective for you. And that is pretty much who's going to buy Fluffy Hat. We're not actually going to do a hero, like the hero thing that we usually do at the end of these, because literally anyone could buy the Fluffy Hat. So if you're building one of these items, Holy Locket or Orb of Corrosion, yes, you can pick up a Fluffy Hat. But even if you're not going to build that and you just need to tank up, if any time in a game you feel like I'm dying a little too easily, I have one more slot that I could buy something for, what should I get? I think it's Fluffy Hat now. I don't think bracers are going to be bought unless you're a strength hero. Then maybe you might buy bracer because you also get some damage and HP regen. And if you need like a bit of intelligence, a bit of agility, but the bracer is going to be a bit of a longer commitment because it is 510 gold. If you want to buy something that's only going to last like, I think you still want it to last probably like 5 minutes or more before you have to replace it, then the fluffy hat is going to be great. But if you're gonna replace it like in like 3 minutes, then like just go for your bigger item, right? You don't need the fluffy hat. But anytime you feel like you need more health, you're dying too easily, try the fluffy hat in the early game. I don't think you'll buy it mid to late game. At that point, you probably just want bigger items. But as you are starting to fill up your inventory, fluffy hat could be some value. I don't think you're gonna want it as a starting item. I just don't think that raw HP is usually what you need. And for now, I was checking around what people are starting with a bit. I may have missed some, but I don't really think people are starting with a fluffy hat. I think for your starting items, you still do a lot of the usual stuff, and then as the laning starts to starts to approach its end, that like 5 to 15 minute mark, when supports are starting to fill out some of their slots before moving on to their big like 4-staff glimmer, possibly a shard, that's when you might consider fluffy hat. That's it I got. Nothing else for you guys on this one. We may have to change this in the future because the meta will shift a lot, but I think that is how fluffy hat is going to play out, and it's kind of already sort of playing out like that. So yeah, thanks for watching. Happy holidays. See you guys.